Fin the Week is brought to you by Indulge, a digital agency built on thinking for the global financial services industry.
Hi there, I'm Amelia.
I'm Paul.
I'm Pat. I'm Russell.
And this is Fin the Week. How's everybody doing?
Really good. Glad it's Friday again.
Yeah, sun's out.
I get to rant about Google today, so I always enjoy that.
Best day ever. So yeah, full house, which feels right because this is one that is firmly a marketing episode. Today we're talking about some news from Google. Paul, fill us in.
Yeah, so in the last couple of weeks, Google has released a guide. They've called it Optimizing Your Website for Generative AI Features on Google Search. So really rolls off the tongue, that one. But yeah, on the face of it, that's quite an exciting thing. It's generally, people see that as good news that Google is providing some kind of guidance straight from the horse's mouth, because everybody wants to appear in Google. So when Google says, here's how you do it, that seems like a good thing. And you know, a large portion of the kind of industry I've seen online have sort of embraced it, particularly those who have sort of had an issue with the idea of, we'll get into the different acronyms, but AEO, GEO, all about ranking in AI-driven search. And a lot of people have argued that there are snake oil salespeople who are pushing services that just don't do anything, and that actually this is just SEO rebranded. And Google's kind of saying that in this document. But on the other hand, when you kind of more closely inspect the document, it's not quite as clear cut as they would maybe want you to believe. So I think it's going to be important for us to sort of dig into it and take a look at what they're saying and why it might not be as clear as they would suggest.
So yeah, we're gonna do this in kind of three parts today. So firstly, we're going to explain what the actual guidance says in plain English, hopefully. 2, we're going to explore kind of how helpful this guidance actually is. And then 3, work out what FS content teams should actually do with it. So let's start with the document itself. What does it say, Paul?
Yeah, so it goes through a few different sections, and I'll kind of give a rundown of what they are. But I think it's important to start with a bit of context, because Google, for us as a search engine, is still far and away the most widely used search tool going. But when you look at the statistics for AI chatbot usage, such as ChatGPT, it's a less clear picture. So ChatGPT has, according to StatCounter, has 77% market share at the moment for AI chatbots. Google's Gemini has 9%. Now, it's worth saying that ChatGPT last year was at 84%, so it's going down. Gemini was at 2%, it's now at 9%, so it's going up. So this isn't a kind of finished battle, but Google doesn't rule the kind of market in this space. It's worth just bearing that in mind, because it sort of changes the way you look at this document, because it's sort of, you wonder whether they're just trying to position themselves as still the leader in this space. But anyway, the document goes into first of all an introduction. So it addresses the fact that users their preferences are evolving. People are increasingly using sort of AI-driven search tools to find the information they need. It says that for website owners, they're looking for, owners are looking for the kind of official best practices for how to succeed with these AI-driven search tools. And then it kind of starts out by saying that SEO is still relevant. So actually, there's going to be a lot of potential jargon here, so it's probably worth just quickly clarifying. So SEO is search engine optimization. I would imagine most of our listeners know about that, know roughly what it is. But then you've got GEO and AEO, so generative engine optimization, answer engine optimization. Pat, from your perspective as an AI expert, is there any difference between those two terms, or are they just one and the same, just with different names?
SEO and GEO.
GEO and AEO.
Oh, okay. No, I mean, we were sort of on this journey quite early, and we coined the term AIO, AI optimization. And since then, the industry has sort of settled on GEO, generative engine optimization, and AEO is also floating around as well, but they're all exactly the same thing, which is just a term to describe the process of managing your online presence so that you appear in the answers provided by these chat tools. I wouldn't say LLMs, I'd say chat tools, because the LLM is like the base training, and then all of these chat tools have like a RAG, retrieval augmented generation data layer across the top. So they'll if you ask a question, the AI tool will query its internal knowledge base, the data that it's been trained on, and then it will carry out a web search to augment that knowledge base answer with up-to-date information, and then it will present a combined answer based on both of those.
Yeah, and that was going to be one of the other questions was, we throw around the term LLM quite a lot. What's the sort of fundamental definition of a large language model? Is it that sort of base training that an AI tool uses?
Yeah, so an AI model is simply a kind of database of weights with an input and an output, and you sort of put an input in one end and an answer is kind of a configuration of artificial neurons in a kind of neural network, and you put an answer in one end and sort of these neurons will fire in a certain order and put an answer out the other end. I use the analogy of a kind of a set of dominoes quite often. So you imagine you've got a set of 100 dominoes in 10 rows, and you've got 10 inputs at one side and 10 outputs on the other. And each row has a number from 1 to 10. So if you put the input of like 1 and 3 in one end, dominoes will tumble down in a straight line. You'll get 1 and 3 out the other end. And that would be your starting model. Say you want to set up a model that will reverse what you put in. So if you put 1 and 3 in, you'll get 3 and 1 out. There's probably a configuration of dominoes that would allow you to do that, but you don't know what that is. So what you do is you just tweak one domino and test it. And if it gets closer to the end result, then you keep that change. If it goes further from the end result, you abandon that change, and you keep on doing that thousands of times until you've got a model that kind of does what you want it to do. Even though if you don't know, even if you don't understand how the configuration of dominoes does it, you've found that by a sort of pseudo random approach. That's only got 100 parameters. If you scale that up to like hundreds of billions, that's what a large language model is. And they've just trained it to be able to interpret text coming in and then spit text out the other side. And so, yeah, that's kind of the core base model. And your base models will be trained once every 6 months or a year. And then that'll be fixed. So you can't modify them. So in the context of improving your performance in a base model, it's kind of hard to benchmark and monitor improvement, because you might only you'll see a change like once every 6 months or a year when you go from like GPT 5.5 to 5.6 or whatever.
Mm. And actually that sort of leads on to the other things that they mention at the start, which is that the document suggests that this new sort of way of searching is basically the same as what SEO was, except it relies on AI techniques, and they mention RAG, so retrieval augmented generation, and query fan out. So my basic understanding of both of those is that what they're talking about there is that they'll have a base model. So if you search for something, if it's something like that's a kind of known fact, like what is the size of this country in square miles or something, it will just use its base knowledge and give you that answer. But if it's something that's more like what is the score for this football match that's going on, it will need to rely on search, so retrieval augmented generation, to get more current information. And then query fan out is the concept of, if you search for something, it will carry out other searches sort of on your behalf that relate to what you searched for. So there might be 10 additional things, so that they can draw together lots of pieces of information. Have I kind of understood that correctly?
Yeah, it's pretty much bang on, yeah. And that's what makes the current sort of AI tools so much more powerful than they were a few years ago. So when ChatGPT was first released, there was a cutoff of like 1 year before it was released, and people just started working around that. You could ask it about all sorts of stuff happening in the last 6 months and it would have no idea. And then they started weaving in search results into that. And suddenly it became really accurate and really up to date. It's really interesting because each different chat tool uses a different search engine. So Gemini obviously leans on Google. So if you want to rank in Gemini, then you need good SEO in Google. But actually, ChatGPT leans on Bing, and that's the leader. So suddenly Bing's a lot more important than traditionally it has been. And then Claude, which is just huge in the business space, I think leans on Brave, which is a really niche search engine.
Yeah. And you can imagine how those different tools suit different audiences, because I would imagine your average sort of person who's experimenting with this stuff probably goes to ChatGPT. People who are perhaps like us, who use Google's tools internally, might use Gemini day to day. And then you've got companies, again, like us, who in a professional context use Claude to do some of the work we do, and probably then use Claude to carry out searches when we need to as well. So, yeah, you can imagine. And then you've got things like Microsoft's Copilot, which is probably used by a lot of professional services firms. So people in those companies might just by default be using Copilot, which is obviously backed by Bing. So yeah, there's a lot of sort of technicalities around the start of the guide, but it's essentially arguing that ranking in AI-driven search is the same as ranking in search, because they're saying that it's fundamentally their large language model is using retrieval augmented generation to go to Google search and bring back results. Therefore, if you're ranking in Google, you'll do well in their AI tools. It then gives some SEO best practices. So it says, these are quite vague, but create valuable non-commodity content for your audience and build and maintain a clear technical structure. And they're both good bits of advice that have existed forever in this kind of digital marketing world. But they're also sort of easily said. But then there are things in there. So first of all, create valuable non-commodity content. Well, that's fine if you're, I suppose, it makes sense if you're producing content for a professional services website. You would instinctively know that you stand more chance of success if you produce a solid bit of opinion and research from a very respected person in your organization, as opposed to writing a guide to what is XYZ basic thing that just draws on information that's already out there in the world. But if you look at it from the perspective of, say, a publisher like The Economist, for instance, which is a sort of high quality publication, Google's saying, well, give us all this good stuff and you'll rank well. But then the argument would be, no, you're just going to repurpose it. So no one's going to come to The Economist to read this expertise. They're going to read it directly on your platform, and they'll potentially never know where it came from. So it's kind of easily said, less easily kind of backed up. And then there's to the other thing about the maintaining a clear technical structure. In one breath, the document says, use semantic HTML, but don't worry too much about it because we'll figure it out. So they're kind of saying, use properly structured code, but if you don't use properly structured code, it's okay because we'll work it out anyway. So, there's mixed signals there. But yeah,
Nice and
Russ, you
clear.
were probably going to say something about the content and kind of user experience, maybe.
Yeah, you kind of got me thinking about how are we moving to a world where structure is less important? Because, up until now, the structure of content and the structure of a website has been one of the key factors in producing a website. And content strategy, I think, is going to change a lot. And the way I see it, I think design and also content is going to become much more modular. So instead of designing a fixed layout for like a page or a website and being like, this is the navigation. You're going to have a about page. You're going to have a services drop down. On the services page, you're going to have an image. You're going to have some copy underneath it. Then you're going to try cross-pollinate across different services. I think we're going to be much more focused on just surfacing blocks of content, less probably thinking about the structure. And then those modules, say like a piece of thought leadership, we can almost kind of weight each module, maybe depending on different things. So, trust, especially in finance, we could have, say, a module on the website needs to explain that whether you're eligible for an account, like a savings account or a mortgage, and that's your kind of, that block basically confirms, well, it provides information on whether you're eligible or not. Then we'll have another block for like a thought leadership article, maybe related to that kind of product. It can all tie together, and then those modules will be surfaced by the search engines, whether AI. And then when it comes to generative UI, the kind of AI will then decide which modules and which blocks to kind of show, depending on that user as well. And it's going to be a much more fluid experience in terms of the end user, and we'll have to adapt quite quickly in terms of our processes to kind of start working in that way. Start thinking less about fixed structure, start thinking more about what modules this website needs in order to rank well in these kind of in these chat tools, rank well on like AI search. It's really interesting. I think, as well as from a design perspective, and I think from a design perspective, obviously this is more in search, but the design system will be much more important, because the design system, it doesn't look at fixed layout pages. It just looks at how you basically style any components and patterns of components, regardless of how they're laid out on the page. So then the design system becomes essentially the most important, and arguably the kind of only thing that you need to kind of do really, really well. And then from a search perspective, as well as, which modules are going to get kind of surfaced when and where, one thing that I'm hearing from clients, even in the last week, is how do they track performance? So, I imagine Google Analytics is probably going to change quite a bit over the next year or two, because we can't really be tracking clicks anymore in the traditional way. It might be interesting to hear your thoughts on that, Paul, as well, as, how in this kind of like where we're going with it all, how do we show our clients, for example, that their digital presence is improving with zero click kind of performance era that we're entering.
Yeah, I mean, on the zero click thing, that's one of the, I would say, flaws with this whole document that Google has published, in that it has a sort of trust us vibe about it. They're sort of saying, don't worry about it, we've got these cool AI features, but it's still Google, it's still SEO, just do what you do and you'll rank and the audience love it, it'll be great. But in actual fact, and we'll probably dig into the flaws in a minute, but if you carry out a basic, I mean, I did it the other day, I searched for something using Google, and like it was something really specific, like who are the top companies in this space, and the AI generated answer was meaningfully different to the list of results that sat below it. So they and I get why that would be, because the AI driven element has probably used query fan out to go and look at much more nuanced things, and it's bringing back different answers based on that. But for the end, kind of the company at the other end who are trying to sort of optimize what they do, that's a challenge. And that Google is the largest source of traffic for them, so this matters. So yeah, it's worth thinking about.
Is it that with sort of large language models augmented with search and their ability to span out loads of search queries all at once and then collate the information together. Does that mean that actually what we're seeing here is that best practice SEO rules are even more important than they were traditionally? Because traditionally you fire out a single search, Google just queries its index and returns a result. But because that's a more simplistic mechanism, there are opportunities to sort of game it and tweak it through clever technical SEO workarounds. It's heavily reliant on backlinks to this day. And as such, you can have like the best site ever with the best content and following all SEO guidance, but a competitor could have a similar site, but because they've done some SEO hacks, they rank better than you. Whereas in a world of large language models, the large language model kind of can see through those hacks and actually prioritizes really well-made websites even better than.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Like good sort of AI optimization, whatever you want to call it, is kind of fundamentally good SEO. But then I would always have argued that good SEO is usually good business, like being a good business that has a niche, has an audience, does everything that audience wants, just operates properly, professionally. And then there's a few technical things like, if you've got a website, you need to make sure it's accessible and follows certain rules and isn't a mess in the back, like behind the scenes. But as long as you tick all of those boxes, being a good business, fundamentally any search tool is trying to surface the best business or the best answer, whatever it happens to be, for the person who's searching. But I suppose the challenge, the thing that's shifting now is that we spoke about it in the Brighton SEO episode, in that Google has been sitting on this line between being a search tool and becoming a media presence in its own right. They've kind of done that for years with, like, if you search for the weather where you are, you no longer need to go to the source. You just get the weather on Google. And now Google is sort of overreaching potentially by taking the content of the companies who are optimizing for their search engine and surfacing it directly. So it's not quite as clean cut as it used to be. But it's probably worth going into the other big section of the document. The one that's probably caused the most amount of chat online is what they call the myth busting section, where they sort of say stuff for you not to worry about. So they call out sort of what they call AEO or GEO hacks that you read online. They say that you don't need an LLMs.txt file, which, without going into getting stuck in the weeds of what that is, it's essentially, if you run a website, you might be familiar with a robots.txt file, which is essentially lives on your server, and when a search engine bot comes to your site, it just tells that bot, here's where the proper content lives, here's where all the technical files live that you don't need to worry about, and it just sort of guides a bot around the site, and people are sort of pushing this idea of an LLMs.txt file, which guides a large language model around your site. Google is saying for their search engine you don't need that, but that it does contradict other stuff they do. Like, so their Lighthouse tool for auditing sites does actually check for an LLMs.txt file. So for agents, it's definitely important, I would say. You don't need to produce a markdown version of your website. I think we touched upon this in a previous episode, but the idea of having a sort of public site and then a simple text version of your site, Google's saying we can see everything, don't worry about doing that. But again, from an agentic AI perspective, that's possibly not the case. You don't need to chunk content. There is a world online where people say you need to chunk content into like little mini chunks that AI bots can just pluck out and use. That's probably fair to say that's not necessary, because search for years has been good at understanding nuance in large bits of content. You don't need to write content in a specific way. Another big one is inauthentic mentions that they mention. So there's this concept of people are now optimizing to get mentions of their brand and their company seeded in different, say, like forums or on Reddit and things like that, so that when these LLMs do their training and they hoover up data from something like Reddit, the idea is that you could game the system by being the brand that's mentioned all the time in certain threads. And Google is saying, don't do that, because that's gaming the system. And it strikes me that inauthentic mentions, as they term it, is now the kind of new link building. So years ago, Google cracked down on spammy link building, people who were paying to buy links on other websites. And they seem to be suggesting now that inauthentic mentions is that, because people are starting to game that system, but they're only gaming that system because it actually works. It's like a powerful way to do it. So it's not infallible. And then the final one is you don't need to over focus on structured data. So again, without going too technical with it, schema.org is an organization that essentially provides a framework for tagging bits of information on a website. So you can tag, this is this street address, this is our postal code, this is our phone number, and you can go much further with it. Cinemas use it for cinema showtimes. And this is another frustrating bit with Google's document. So it says, it's a good idea to continue using it because it's just good, but we don't use it for AI search, but do it because it's good. And it's just not clear, that's a problem, because there's a lot of people online who are saying you have to do schema markup, you have to do structured data, and then there are people saying don't do it, it's a waste of time. AI doesn't use it, and there's this just messy bit in the middle, and it's difficult for an agency like us, for instance. Like, we generally advise clients, do it where it makes sense, because it's clean code, it's well structured. If I were trying to figure out a system, I would want it to be structured in the way that schema kind of encourages you to. But we don't, at the same time, we don't go overboard, because we know that you could get caught out, because Google would come along and say, all that time you spent building schema markup is a waste of time. So, there's a lot of there's that myth busting section, and basically half of the industry have hooked onto it and said, see, we told you, it's just SEO. And then the other half have said, but actually it's not as clean cut as they say.
Can you see Google search still being around in a few years? Or do you think they're kind of covering themselves a bit by saying you don't really need it, but you should have it because
they're
Google
hedging.
search is still there. And if they tell everyone the schema isn't required anymore, then there's kind of transition between Google search being phased out, which is probably likely long term, and being replaced by AI search and more kind of generative kind of search. It sounds like they might just be saying it isn't needed for AI search, but you still need it for Google search. So we're kind of saying you don't need it, but you still need it at the moment.
Yeah. Well, that's one of my main gripes with the whole thing, is and you can't really blame Google for this, but it's written in a vacuum. It's basically saying this is specific for Google search, but it's ignorant of the fact that, but there's also Gemini, which is a standalone tool, which they probably wouldn't class as Google search. There's also all of the other AI tools out there that aren't anything to do with Google, so fair enough, they don't need to address that. But they're sort of ignoring the wider context, because I think Google search, and this is something that, again, in the Brighton SEO discussion we had, Dr. Pete from Moz, who's kind of does a lot of research in this space, his view is that it will become a kind of hybrid search system where Google will essentially form whatever front end you need in the moment. So it'll be a kind of hybrid of an AI chat and a search tool. And I think that's probably what will happen. And, you'd be brave to bet against Google in eventually winning this battle, because they've done it before. Like, if you look at the thing I keep thinking of is with browsers, Internet Explorer and other browsers before were way ahead of Google. Firefox was probably ahead, but Google came along with Chrome and they just persevered with it until it dominated the market. And I think they'll do the same with search. But this document, the final thing on this section is just to say that they gloss over agentic AI as well. They really, they literally say at the end of it, if this is something that's relevant to your business and you have the extra time, check out available agentic experiences and review our guide to that. But it's like, well, agentic is arguably the most important part of all of this, because that's really the direction of travel. And that ties into what you were talking about, Russ, with this idea of modular things where brands could perhaps surface modules that fit into an agentic experience.
Yeah, and I think and the most exciting side of it for the consumer is personalization. If you have access needs, then you'll kind of, when you search for something, whether that's in the traditional Google search or this new kind of hybrid search, you'll get results which flag if there's if you're looking to go for a restaurant, it would show restaurants which have good accessibility, for example. If you're looking for clothes, it would show clothes in the style that kind of suits you. And if you're looking for something sports related, it would show articles related to the sports that you're passionate about. And I think that's kind of where search is going, and that's really interesting. And that's what AI gives us, is that level of personalization, which in the past was quite a static configuration that you'd have to do probably in a series of fields in your profile. Whereas now it's probably picking up that from like lots of different sources and figuring it out. So that's really exciting for search. And I think it's going to give people a much better experience.
Mm.
So shall we move on to talk about how helpful this guidance is? And of course, we've touched upon this, but ultimately, can we trust it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I'm usually quite cynical with this stuff, but I don't think we can really trust it, because, Google really does have a vested interest in everybody sort of lapping up the advice. But the example I gave before about if you read the advice as a business and you think, well, why wouldn't I follow that? Because produce great content, have a technically sound website, and hopefully then Google's search systems and its AI systems will surface us as a source of information. And I have to get comfortable with the fact that I might not get the traffic for that, but hopefully they'll mention my company when they give an answer to something. Which is, so that's maybe the new world we're in now, where you don't get the traffic, but you get the mention. Fine, you have to accept that. But the problem I have is that if you read this in the context, so if I was working for The Economist, they're basically saying, keep your website open, don't put it behind a paywall, produce this amazing content and we'll find it and we'll surface it. And it's like, well, there's a real dilemma there, because you think, why would we want to give you all of that sort of, all of our assets for free, basically, because you're not going to send that traffic to us, and they don't benefit from them saying The Economist gave us this answer, because by that time the person's got their answer and off they go. So I think it overlooks that, and I think that's the other big issue with it is that, like I said before, it's written in a vacuum. It doesn't really look at agentic AI. It doesn't look at the wider context of AI chatbots versus Google search. It doesn't address the fact that traffic isn't flowing through to content owners' websites anymore. And that's something that we're seeing day in, day out. Like we produce reports every month for different clients, different companies of different sizes, and across the board, they're all seeing quite wacky changes in performance. Like even yesterday, we were looking at a report where the company was sort of, clicks from Google search was really going off a cliff in a quite shocking way, and the availability of search sort of ranking positions for sort of general informational things was just disappearing. And that's almost certainly because Google's AI overviews is just hoovering up all of that user demand. On the flip side, the company was getting far more brand visibility. People were searching for their brand more frequently, which is arguably a good thing. But this document doesn't really address that massive shift in the way things are working at all. So Yeah, I struggle to trust it fully. I think it's a really basic guide for it's a simple answer to a complex question, this guide.
So does it really address, it feels like a kind of a bit of a wishy-washy guide for like optimizing your site for Google search as it currently is right now, which is still fundamentally Google search with like AI overviews at the top. But actually, personally, like I just don't use Google. The only thing I use Google for is if I'm looking for a specific website, and I'll just go into the Firefox browser bar and I'll just type in, I don't know, Merlin Cycles or Camilla's Cafe.
Mm.
And then that's literally all I use it for, just brand searches. As soon as it comes to like product research or advice or medical advice, product advice, solving problems, troubleshooting, straight into Claude. And if it's a simple question, I'll use Claude Chat. If it's a complicated question, I'll use Claude Cowork. And Cowork is an agentic AI which will go off and explore in great depth many different avenues. It will browse websites itself. It will obviously use Brave. It doesn't even touch Google. And that kind of paradigm of usage is completely different to search.
It's probably worth as well mentioning that a while ago, Microsoft released a similar guide in relation to how they use or how they sort of surface AI search results. And I found it much more interesting, not because it gave any major takeaways, but because it focused on just telling you how the system works, and it explained to some extent the difference between, and actually one of the things I made a note about here is the difference between AI training and AI grounding. So the thing we were talking about before, where you've got the base LLM model that sits at the bottom and can answer sort of factual things, and then you've got the sort of retrieval augmented generation that goes and does the search for you and fills in the more up-to-date information. The Microsoft document focused on just making sure that the reader got a sense of how this system works, so that you can then go away and think about it and think, okay, well, I can kind of imagine how I would make myself useful for that system. This Google one, on the other hand, doesn't address that at all. And instead, you could probably boil it down to just saying, ignore all the hype. It's just SEO, do good content, and you'll be fine. And I argue you probably won't be fine.
Yeah.
It'll be, it's going to change, and they're not admitting it.
Gives the impression that the Google like Gemini chat like is just purely the grounding. All it does is like carry out searches and then summarize those searches into an answer, and ignores all of the fundamental like knowledge-based training that large language model has. Because that's the difference here, because a large language model works very differently to a search index. And so you've got these two sources of information. If you want to rank well, you need to be, large language model needs to be aware of your brand and what you do, so that it can talk about who you are, and then it will augment that with the search results. And if Gemini is just ignoring that base model knowledge and just compiling search results, then yeah, this absolutely makes sense. But it's not doing that, is it? Like it's using the core search model as well, and like ranking getting yourself into that knowledge, that model's training data. I mean, that fundamentally is a summary of all the information that exists in your business online.
Yeah,
but in a very different way. Yeah.
And that reminds me,
just indexed in a very different way.
Yeah, and actually made a note about that somewhere, that was essentially saying that there's examples where you could think, well, there might be companies out, again, coming back to an example like The Economist or the FT or any publisher, they might think, well, I want to be available to the bots that come to my site to surface my pages in a search result, but I don't want to be available to an AI training bot that comes to my site to hoover up information to add to its core model. And that's a genuine thing that needs to be solved. And this would be a great place to address that, a document like this, but they don't say, because that's that's different to SEO. That's not SEO. That's figuring out, how do we make sure that we don't, our proprietary content doesn't get basically taken by a training model, but we keep our website open so that a search bot that surfaces things for real people can find us and can use that information? And there isn't an answer to that, and Google hasn't made any efforts to try and answer that, as far as I can see. Not in this document, anyway.
Yeah, it sounds like there's going to be a new structure at some point. I guess it has to give some protection to the companies providing this information as well, some way. It should be a choice of the business, kind of where that information is given to and how it's stored. So I think you mentioned the kind of robots.txt file, and the document is talking about these LLMS text files, but perhaps it kind of lives in some kind of special markdown where you can kind of choose what is stored where in the future, just so you have some control over it, over your own, over your own information, really.
So ultimately, is this advice at all helpful?
I think it's one of those things where it's the fundamental advice is, produce good content that isn't just the same old rubbish you could read anywhere. Make sure it actually comes from, you're not just writing for the sake of it. You're writing something that adds to the conversation, and have a technically sound structure behind it. Like, that's just good advice. So that's always been good advice, and that's good advice not just for search. That's good advice as a business. So, like, yeah, that's fine, but it doesn't add anything new that people needed to know, I don't think. And if anything, it just stirs the pot a bit, because there are a lot of people online already arguing about, is GEO a thing or is it just SEO? And I don't think this really helps that conversation, because it glosses over so much.
So we've talked about the guidance, what it says, and kind of how helpful it is. Now let's talk about what FS content teams should actually be doing now moving forward based on this.
Yeah, so starting with the content point, I mean, this has been the case forever, really, but Google wants, any tool really wants, a kind of unique point of view from content. There's no point in writing generic guides anymore. Like, so the example I wrote down was like 7 tips for first-time buyers. That's like a list article. It just provides answers that are well written online by other sites already, and provides no new things. So if you're going to put effort into writing content, your best bet is to use genuine expertise that exists within your organization. And if you've got the bandwidth, do your own research. So that type of content will do better, not for any kind of technical reason or for a trick. It's just like, it makes sense. As a person, I want to read something that comes from a real piece of research. I don't want another cobbled together guide. And that's what this is saying. It kind of, I suppose it's just saying that approach is more important than ever, because I suppose you could argue AI driven search is going to be better at surfacing the genuine best answer than search has ever been before. So being the best answer is more important than it's ever been before.
Yeah, and also I think from the perspective of who your products are for, especially in terms of consumer duty, you should make it clear. Say if it's a business account, what size business, perhaps where those businesses can be located, what types of businesses. Now having that kind of structure of information about who, what, clearly explaining the benefits of each product, whether that's savings products or mortgage products or investment products, who it's for, what it does, and the benefits and the criteria for being able to kind of purchase one of these products is even more important now, because that information is going to be in search, and it's going to be highly personalized. So the websites that are doing that right are not only going to have a better experience on the website, like has been quite obvious for years, but also they're going to have a much higher chance of being surfaced by AI. So it's even more and more important to kind of clearly define who your products are for and the benefits, and have everything in place, I think.
Yeah, and another thing is, there's a compliance challenge for financial services teams for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's the workflow that potentially happens inside some organizations where the typical kind of journey to creating a piece of content would be that the subject matter expert drafts it, marketing then edit it, legal reviews it, compliance reviews it, and by the time it's gone through all of that, it's probably, or it's potentially stripped out a lot of the sort of character and voice that actually it started with. And there's an argument to say that maintaining as much of that personal, written by a real person with real expertise element is going to be important. So, and I don't think that's a major hurdle to get over. I think it's just a case of companies being more deliberate now about saying, we're not just going to write a guide to this thing we know really well. We're going to make sure it's backed by our senior partner who knows this thing inside out, and it will have genuine quotes, and we'll back it by a bit of our own research, and make sure that when it goes through legal and compliance, none of that sort of important stuff is stripped out, and making sure that there's a balance between sticking your neck out a bit with something new, but maintaining that kind of professional sheen that it needs. There's also another compliance challenge in that when you publish something online, you have to be comfortable with the fact that certain bits of that content might be clipped and reused in an AI generated answer, which means that if you're making a claim about something that would normally be covered at the end of your article saying this was written on this date by this person in this context and shouldn't be used outside of this context, it's not advice, blah, 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 you almost have to start adding your disclaimers in line with claims, which is a challenge because, you want to make sure that if it does get clipped and used elsewhere, you don't want Google's Gemini saying XYZ firm said this piece of advice, but they miss out the disclaimer, because that's an issue. So yeah, you almost need to wrap your disclaimers into whatever you're saying, which that's a challenge, and I'm not sure how you kind of overcome that. So yeah, and then the final bit of advice I wrote down was that you need to sort of, and it kind of ties to everything I've been saying already, surface the people and surface the workings. So you need to write in the voice of the people who are the experts. We've done this ourselves recently, actually, as an agency. We've kind of completely shifted the way our website is structured, mainly to sort of surface the people behind it. And so every claim we make is usually attached to a person, and we're trying to sort of, because that's how it works. We're speaking in our own voices, and we sort of want to present it. And I think firms are going to need to do that as well. They're going to need to make sure if they write a guide to something, it has to be attributed. Otherwise, these systems are potentially going to overlook it.
So, Pat, Russ, have you got anything else to add when it comes to what teams should be doing now based on this?
Well, I mean, research is, especially user research, is something I'm quite passionate about. And I think that kind of point you made, Paul, about doing your own research there to kind of make you stand out, and it's so important to a kind of thought process now, and that's where you add a lot of value, I think, in terms of producing something. It's your own unique perspective and that gathering of research for that final output, I think, which makes you different from every other organization. But especially now when scraping the web and compiling all the research that everyone has done before is so easy with AI, there's going to be a lot of kind of end results that are quite similar or a little bit kind of generic. So, doubling down on speaking to your audience and testing your websites, getting feedback, I think will really make your work, whether that's written work or visual work, really stand out moving forwards. I think that's really key. And hearing you explain it there, Paul, that kind of really stood out for me.
I think going back to a previous comment you made, Paul, which is around just kind of running a good business. I think that with AI, these tools will just become incredibly good at matching the right business to the right customer. And so as a business, you need to be providing good services at good value You need to be focused. You need to find a niche. You need to get all your marketing nailed and just generally run a really tight ship. Understand who your target customers are, like you were saying, Russ. Because if you understand who your target clients are and you're marketing really well to them and you're providing great services to them, then like these tools will just find you. There'll be no way to fake it. So really, it just comes down to like just being a good business. I think, and if you are and you do everything like in a really solid way, then these tools will kind of find you. I think there'll be less shortcuts to like driving traffic. You won't be able to fake it as much. That's my kind of view of where it's all going.
You've just reminded me, Pat. I've been on the web for probably since like 97, 98 or something. I remember back in the day, used to get something called a link farm, which was literally just this page of links.
It still exists. Still exist, believe it or not. And they still work.
Well, I don't think they will.
They're just much more sophisticated than they used to be. Yeah.
There'll be citation farms now.
Yeah.
So before we go, shall we have a quick game of Jargon Busters?
Yeah. Lighten the tone.
Yeah, shall we? So if you've not caught this before, I've got a list of these kind of industry terms, and I'm going to be putting the guys to the test to see if they know what today's word is. So today's word is churning. What do we reckon?
Well, there's obviously customer churn, isn't there? It's churning customers because you're doing something wrong, or there's some economic thing that's happened that's resulted in customers just leaving you in droves. It's kind of what I'd say.
Yeah, in a finance context, I don't actually know for sure, but if I had to guess, I'd say it's something to do with investments, perhaps. And do you is it a sort of an element of your portfolio that you write off for one reason or another? It's like you expect every year to churn a certain amount of your portfolio, so it just sort of disappears.
Yeah, I think, in an FS context, I guess, churning means when you're kind of just going through something and it's not being replaced normally. So, churning through, maybe just churning through money, maybe. I'm not sure.
So churning means excessive trading by a broker in a client's account to generate commissions.
Oh,
Interesting.
okay.
That's probably the first one that none of us have really nailed, right?
Yeah,
So
to be fair.
Yeah. So actually, it isn't churning without anything in return. It's churning and generating commission.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. So we will obviously have more of this next week in our next episode. We will be back next Friday. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Before we go, it's time for a quick shameless plug. This episode was brought to you by Indulge, a digital agency built on thinking for the global financial services sector. If you're looking for an agency that can specialise in UX and design, production, and marketing, then look no further. To find out more, visit indulge.digital. Thanks for listening.